The battle had been fierce and quick. The human frigate tried to escape, but the Vorthak warships surrounded it like hunters around wounded prey. Commander Velkath watched from his position on the bridge as the human ship's engines flickered and died. One more victory for the Empire. One more step toward total conquest of the galaxy. The war had been going on for 30 years now. 30 long years of fighting across the stars. The Vorthak Empire had grown strong during that time. Their queen, Zilara, led them with an iron fist. Under her rule, they had taken over 70% of all known space. Planet after planet fell before their superior weapons and their strange mental powers. The Vorthak could read minds, could push thoughts into enemy heads, could break the will of their opponents without firing a single shot. Earth was one of the few places still standing against them. The humans had no mental powers. Their technology was not as advanced, but they refused to give up. They fought with everything they had, using tricks and tactics that confused the Vorthak commanders. Sometimes they won. Most times they lost, but they never stopped fighting. Today was another loss for humanity. The frigate they captured had been trying to deliver supplies to a colony under siege. Now those supplies would never arrive. The colony would likely fall within weeks. Another human world would become part of the Empire. Velkath sent his soldiers onto the captured ship. They found most of the crew dead. The battle had torn through the small vessel, leaving bodies and broken equipment everywhere. But in the medical bay they found something interesting. A human soldier, barely alive, kept breathing by machines and medical pods. Next to him stood a human doctor, a woman with tired eyes who refused to leave her patient even when the Vorthak soldiers pointed weapons at her. The soldiers brought both of them back to the Vorthak flagship. The doctor, whose name was Lisa Carter, tried to keep the wounded soldier stable during the transfer. She worked with quick, practiced hands, checking monitors and adjusting medicine doses. The Vorthak medics watched her with curiosity. Humans were so fragile, yet this one fought death with impressive determination. Queen Zilara heard about the prisoners within minutes. She stood in her command chamber, a massive room with walls that showed the stars outside. Her skin was deep purple, smooth and marked with silver patterns that showed her royal status. She had 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows of 3, and they all gleamed with intelligence and power. She wore armor made of black metal that seemed to drink in the light around it. Most captured humans were sent to prison camps or executed quickly. Zilara rarely paid attention to individual prisoners. There were too many of them, and they were all the same to her. Just another defeated enemy. Just another step on her path to total victory. But something about this particular prisoner caught her interest. The report said he should have been dead. His injuries were massive. Burns covered half his body. His left arm was crushed. 3 ribs were broken. One of his lungs had collapsed. Internal bleeding had nearly drained him dry. Yet somehow he still lived. The human doctor had kept him alive through skill and stubborn refusal to give up. Even the Vorthak medical officers admitted they were impressed. Zilara decided to see this stubborn human for herself. She made her way down to the medical bay, her guards following behind her. The other Vorthak in the corridors pressed themselves against the walls as she passed, bowing their heads in respect and fear. Queen Zilara had ruled for 8 years, and in that time, she had never shown mercy to anyone who challenged her authority. The medical bay was cold and clinical, all white walls and bright lights. The wounded soldier lay in a stasis pod, his body surrounded by a faint blue glow that kept him stable. Tubes and wires connected him to various machines. His face was pale, almost gray, but his chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths. Dr. Carter stood nearby, watching the monitors with worried eyes. When the Queen entered, the human doctor stiffened but did not bow. She met Zilara's gaze directly, showing no fear. This surprised the Queen. Most humans cowered in her presence. This one seemed more concerned about her patient than about her own life. Commander Velkath entered behind the Queen. He was a tall Vorthak with dark blue skin and sharp features. He had served Zilara faithfully for years and knew her moods well. He could tell she was curious about this prisoner, though he did not understand why. Zilara approached the stasis pod slowly. She looked down at the human soldier with her 6 eyes, studying him carefully. He looked ordinary, not particularly tall or strong. His face had the weathered look of someone who had seen combat, but nothing marked him as special. Just another human warrior, defeated and broken, yet something made her pause. Perhaps it was the way he had survived such terrible wounds. Perhaps it was the doctor's fierce dedication to keeping him alive. Or perhaps it was something else, something she could not quite name, a feeling deep in her mind that this was not just another prisoner. She turned to Velkath with a casual gesture. Her voice was smooth and cold like ice over deep water. She asked him a simple question. What was this human's name? What was his rank? Tell her about this soldier who refused to die. Velkath pulled up a holographic display from his wrist device. The information floated in the air between them, glowing softly in the harsh medical bay lights. He scanned the data quickly, reading from the identification tags they had taken from the soldier's uniform. The commander's voice was professional and clear as he read the information aloud. Lieutenant Kyle Morrison, age 32, born on Earth, served in the Earth Defense Force for 14 years, part of the Special Operations Division. Multiple commendations for bravery, several successful missions behind enemy lines. A good soldier, but nothing extraordinary. Just another human fighting a war they could not win. The name hung in the air for a moment. Lieutenant Kyle Morrison, a simple name. Common among humans. Nothing special about it at all. But when that name was spoken, something impossible happened. Queen Xylara froze completely. Her body went rigid as if turned to stone. Her purple skin became pale, almost gray, like all the blood had drained from her body. Her 6 eyes went wide, wider than anyone had ever seen them. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Everyone present felt it. Velkath stopped reading the report and looked at his queen with growing confusion. The guards at the door shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Carter watched with sharp, observant eyes, noting everything. For 10 long seconds, Xylara did not move, did not breathe, did not blink. She simply stood there frozen, staring down at the unconscious human soldier as if she had seen a ghost rise from the dead. Velkath had served the Queen for many years. He had seen her face enemy fleets without fear. He had watched her execute traitors without hesitation. He had stood beside her as she conquered world after world. Never, not once in all that time, had he seen any emotion on her face except cold authority and absolute confidence. But now, looking at her frozen expression, he saw something he never thought possible. He saw fear, pure, absolute, paralyzing fear. The Queen who had conquered half the galaxy could not move, could not speak, could not even breathe properly, all because of a name, all because of a wounded human soldier lying unconscious in a medical pod. Velkath carefully asked if the Queen was well. His voice was cautious, concerned. He had never seen her like this before. It frightened him more than any battle ever had. Xylara finally blinked. The movement seemed to take enormous effort, as if she had to remember how her own body worked. She took a shaking breath, then another. Slowly, color returned to her skin, but her eyes remained fixed on the human soldier, unable to look away. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. It shook with emotion that no one had ever heard from her before. She told Velkath to seal the medical bay. Maximum security. No one enters without her direct permission. No recordings. No reports. This prisoner was now her personal concern. The commander obeyed immediately, though confusion filled his mind. He began issuing orders to the guards, setting up the security protocols the Queen demanded. But as he worked, he watched her carefully. He had served Xylara long enough to know when something was wrong. And this was very, very wrong. Dr. Carter also watched the Queen's reaction. The human doctor was intelligent and observant. She had seen the fear in those alien eyes. She had heard the shake in that powerful voice. Whatever this meant, whatever history existed between her patient and this alien Queen, it was clearly significant. Xylara forced herself to stand straighter. She pulled her royal authority around herself like armor, trying to hide the weakness she had just shown, but everyone in the room had seen it. The unshakable Queen had been shaken. The fearless conqueror had been afraid. She turned away from the stasis pod and walked toward the door. Her steps were measured and controlled, but those who knew her well could see the tension in her movements. She was holding herself together through pure force of will. Before she left, she gave one final order. Keep the human soldier alive. Use whatever resources necessary. The human doctor would continue to treat him, under constant guard. If he died, everyone in the medical bay would die with him. Then she was gone, striding through the corridors back to her command. 8 years ago, Zalara was not a queen. She was a commander, ambitious and skilled, rising quickly through the ranks of the Vorthak military. Her superiors gave her what they thought would be an easy assignment: conquer the human colony on a planet called Kepler 442b. Take the mining facilities, eliminate any resistance, show the humans that fighting back was useless. The intelligence report said it would take 2 weeks at most. Kepler 442b was a small colony, less than 5,000 people, mostly miners and their families. They had no military base, no defensive fleet, no orbital weapons, just a handful of security officers and some old mining equipment. Easy prey. Zalara brought 10,000 warriors. She brought advanced weapons, armored vehicles, and air support. She brought telepaths who could break through any defense, find any hidden position, crush any resistance before it could form. She expected total victory within days. What she found instead was a nightmare that lasted 6 months. The human military had sent one advisor to Kepler 442b 3 months before the invasion. Just one soldier, a staff sergeant named Kyle Morrison. His job was simple: teach the colonists basic defense tactics, help them prepare shelters, show them how to survive if the Vorthak came. No one expected him to turn those frightened miners into an army. No one expected him to hold off an entire invasion force. But that is exactly what he did. Morrison understood something that most military commanders did not. He understood that you did not need to win every battle. You just needed to make victory too expensive for the enemy to afford. He taught the colonists to fight like ghosts, hit hard, disappear fast, never give the enemy a solid target. The colony had extensive tunnel networks from decades of mining. Morrison turned those tunnels into a maze of death. The Vorthak would enter confident and strong, then find themselves cut off, surrounded, attacked from every direction. By the time they fought their way out, half their force would be gone. Zalara sent her telepaths to find the hidden colonists. Morrison had prepared for that too. He set up signal broadcasters throughout the tunnels that created mental noise, confusion that scrambled telepathic senses. The Vorthak psychics got headaches trying to sort through the chaos. Some went temporarily mad from the interference. After the first month, Zalara had lost 2,000 warriors. Her superiors demanded results. They questioned her competence. How could one human advisor and a bunch of miners hold off the mighty Vorthak Empire? She promised victory within weeks. She was wrong. Morrison seemed to know her moves before she made them. When she planned a direct assault, he turned the ground itself into a weapon. Explosive charges buried in the rock, triggered at the perfect moment. When she tried to starve them out by blockading supply routes, he showed the colonists how to grow food in underground gardens and collect water from deep wells. The worst moment came in what the survivors later called the Canyon Massacre. Zalara had tracked a group of colonists to a narrow canyon system. She sent her best troops, her elite guard, 500 of the finest warriors in the Empire. They entered the canyon confident and ready. They never came out. Morrison had been preparing that trap for weeks. Explosive charges placed carefully along the canyon walls, supports weakened at precise points. When the Vorthak were deep inside, surrounded by rock on all sides, he triggered everything at once. The canyon collapsed. Thousands of tons of rock and dirt buried the elite guard alive. The few who survived the initial collapse found themselves trapped in darkness, cut off from help, slowly running out of air. By the time Zalara's forces dug them out 3 days later, only 12 warriors remained alive. 500 elite soldiers, destroyed by one human and his carefully laid trap. That defeat changed something in Zalara. It stopped being just another conquest, it became personal. She needed to capture this human, this Morrison who made her look weak and foolish. She needed to prove that the Vorthak were superior. She needed to win, not just for the Empire, but for herself. She started studying him. Every attack, every trap, every move he made, she analyzed carefully. She began to understand his patterns, his thinking. He was not just a soldier following orders. He was an artist of war, turning weakness into strength, using the enemy's own power against them. One night, She was reviewing surveillance footage from one of the tunnel systems. The recording was poor quality, damaged by the mental interference devices Morrison used. But for a few seconds, the image cleared. She saw him, just for a moment, standing alone in a tunnel. He was singing. The audio was damaged, but she could hear fragments of the song. It was something old, something beautiful, a human melody about grace and redemption. His voice was rough but sincere. He sang while setting up explosive charges. He sang while preparing to kill her soldiers. He sang in the middle of a war zone as if he was simply doing a difficult job that needed to be done. That moment haunted Zylara more than any of the military defeats. The Vorthak did not sing during battle. They focused on efficiency, on victory, on conquest. The idea of finding beauty in the middle of horror was completely alien to them. Yet this human did it naturally, as if war and grace could exist in the same moment. After 4 months, Zylara's forces had been reduced to 6,000 warriors. Her superiors threatened to remove her from command. This was supposed to be an easy conquest, and she was turning it into a disaster. She promised them that she would end it within 2 weeks, or accept execution for her failure. She changed tactics completely. Instead of trying to fight Morrison's guerrilla war, she focused on finding the civilians. If she could not beat him in the tunnels, she would force him to come to her. She located the main civilian shelter, a deep bunker where hundreds of colonists hid. Morrison must have known what she planned. He must have known that saving those civilians would cost him everything. But he came anyway. He always came. The final battle lasted 4 days. Morrison held the approaches to the civilian bunker with less than 50 defenders. They fought from fortified positions, made every meter cost the Vorthak dearly. But Zylara had numbers and time on her side. She kept pushing forward, accepting heavy casualties, knowing that eventually they would break through. On the 4th day, Morrison made his move. While Zylara's forces were focused on the bunker entrance, he was evacuating the civilians through hidden escape tunnels, old mining shafts that led to the surface kilometers away, carefully prepared routes that ended at hidden shuttle pads. By the time Zylara broke through the defenses, the bunker was empty. Morrison had saved them all. Every single civilian was gone, lifted off the planet by shuttles that escaped before the Vorthak could intercept them. But Morrison himself was still there. He stayed behind, holding the central command center alone, buying time for the last shuttles to escape. Zylara found him in a room surrounded by monitors and communication equipment, calmly setting demolition charges. She wanted to capture him alive. She wanted to interrogate him, to understand how one human had accomplished so much. She sent warriors to rush the room, to take him before he could trigger the charges. Morrison looked directly at the surveillance camera. For just a moment, his eyes met hers through the video feed. He smiled, a sad, tired smile. Then he triggered the charges. The explosion collapsed the entire facility. The blast was so powerful that it created a crater 50 meters deep. When Zylara's forces dug through the rubble, they found nothing. No body, no equipment, nothing but melted metal and broken rock. Later, her surveillance detected a small shuttle launching from a hidden pad 20 kilometers away. The shuttle's reactor was unstable, damaged, leaking radiation. It headed into deep space on a suicide trajectory. Before Zylara could send ships to intercept, the reactor went critical. The explosion was visible from orbit, a brief flash of light that faded quickly into the darkness. No one could have survived that explosion. The reactor blast would have vaporized anything within 100 meters. Morrison was dead. Defeated. Gone. Zylara returned to her commanders and reported total victory. She claimed she had personally killed the human advisor in single combat before he could escape. She described a heroic battle, a glorious duel between warriors. Her story made her a legend among the Vorthak, the commander who defeated the ghost of Kepler. It was a lie. She had not fought him personally. She had not defeated him in honorable combat. She had simply watched him choose death over capture. But the lie served her well. Within 2 years, she was promoted to general. Within 5 years, she became queen. Her reputation was built on that victory at Kepler 442. She told herself that the lie did not matter. Morrison was dead. The civilians were scattered and irrelevant. The colony was conquered. The victory was real even if the details were changed. She almost believed it. But sometimes, in quiet moments, she would remember that surveillance footage. The human soldier singing in a tunnel, finding beauty in the middle of war. That memory disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. It suggested that humans had something the Vorthak had lost, something that made them dangerous in ways that could not be measured by weapons or tactics. For 8 years she pushed those memories away. She focused on conquest, on building her empire, on proving Vorthak superiority. She almost forgot about Kyle Morrison and the lies she told about his death. Zylara returned to her private chambers and sealed the door. Her hands shook as she poured herself a drink from a crystal container. The liquid was blue and cold, meant to calm Vorthak nerves. She drank it in one swallow and felt nothing. The fear remained, cold and heavy in her chest. Morrison was alive. The man she claimed to have killed in glorious combat was breathing, wounded but alive, aboard her own ship. If anyone discovered the truth, everything she had built would collapse. Her officers would question her honesty. Her enemies would use this to challenge her authority. The entire empire might turn against her. The simple solution would be to kill him immediately. Walk back to that medical bay and end him while he lay helpless in the stasis pod. No one would question the death of a human prisoner. She could say he died from his wounds. Problem solved, but she had already shown weakness. Her officers had seen her freeze when his name was spoken. They had seen the fear in her eyes. If Morrison died suddenly now, they would become suspicious. Commander Velkath especially would start asking questions. He was too intelligent, too observant, too loyal to ignore strange behavior from his queen. Zylara pressed her hands against her temples, trying to think clearly. She needed a plan. She needed to control the situation before it spiraled beyond her grasp. Meanwhile, in his own quarters, Commander Velkath sat before multiple displays, searching through military databases. The Queen's reaction bothered him deeply. In all his years of service, he had never seen Zylara show fear. She faced enemy fleets without hesitation. She executed traitors without remorse. She commanded the Empire with absolute confidence. Yet one human name made her freeze like prey before a predator. Why, what was special about Kyle Morrison? He pulled up Morrison's official military record. The information was straightforward. Born on Earth 32 years ago. Enlisted at age 18, served in various combat zones. Promoted to lieutenant after showing leadership skills. Multiple commendations for bravery and tactical thinking. Nothing exceptional. Just a competent soldier with a decent career. But Velkath had learned to read between lines. He noticed gaps in Morrison's service record. Several months here and there where his location was listed as classified. Missions with no details, just dates and the word completed. That suggested special operations work. Dangerous assignments that required secrecy. He expanded his search, looking through captured human intelligence databases. The Vorthak had taken many human computers and files during the war. Most of it was useless, but sometimes you found interesting things buried in the data. After 2 hours of searching, he found something. A reference in an old human military analysis report. The document discussed unusual defensive successes against Vorthak forces. Most human colonies fell quickly when attacked, but a few held out longer than expected. The report tried to identify common factors in these successful defenses. One section caught his attention. It mentioned legends among human soldiers about a phantom warrior they called the Ghost of Kepler. According to the stories, this ghost had held off an entire Vorthak invasion force for months, saving thousands of civilians. The report dismissed these stories as myths, exaggerations born from desperate hope. But it noted that something unusual had definitely happened at Kepler 442b 8 years ago. 8 years ago, Velkath's mind began making connections. He accessed Vorthak military records from that time period. The conquest of Kepler 442b. He had not been part of that campaign, but he knew the basic story. A difficult siege that took months longer than expected. High casualties. Eventually successful under the leadership of Commander Zylara, who personally killed the human advisor in single combat. That victory made Zylara famous. It started her rise to power. She became known as the commander who defeated the Ghost of Kepler, the one who proved that human resistance was ultimately futile. Velkath sat back, thinking carefully. Could Morrison be that same advisor? Could he be the ghost of Kepler? The timeline matched. The military specialty matched. But if he was the same person, that meant he survived Kepler 442b, which meant the Queen's story about killing him in single combat could not be true. This was dangerous territory. Questioning the Queen's honesty could be considered treason. But Velkath served the Empire first, and the Empire needed truth, not comfortable lies. He decided to continue investigating quietly and carefully. In the medical bay, Dr. Lisa Carter watched over her patient. The guard stood nearby, weapons ready, watching her every move. She had been treating Morrison's wounds for hours, stabilizing systems that wanted to shut down, fighting to keep him alive. She was exhausted, but she kept working. Morrison was not just another soldier to her. They had served together for 2 years. She knew his habits, his humor, his absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. He had saved her life once during an evacuation under fire. She owed him this effort. But she was also confused by what she had witnessed. The alien queen's reaction to Morrison's name had been extreme and telling. Carter was a doctor, trained to observe subtle signs of distress. She had seen genuine fear in those alien eyes, fear in something else, recognition perhaps, or guilt. Whatever the reason, it meant Morrison was valuable to the Queen in some way. That might be useful if she could figure out how to leverage it. Carter was not just a doctor. She was a soldier too, and she understood that information was a weapon. She noticed something odd about the security arrangements. Normal prisoners had standard guards, usually 2 or 3 soldiers. Morrison had 6 guards, all elite warriors, all watching him constantly. And every 2 hours, one guard would send a report directly to the Queen's personal communication. Channel this level of attention for a wounded lieutenant made no sense unless Morrison was far more important than his rank suggested. Carter filed that observation away, adding it to her growing list of suspicious details. 2 days passed. Zilara tried to maintain normal operations, giving orders, reviewing reports, pretending nothing was wrong. But internally she was falling apart. Every time she received an update on Morrison's condition, her heart raced. Every time Velkath entered the room, she feared he had discovered the truth. She needed to make a decision soon. But what decision? Kill Morrison and risk raising suspicions? Keep him alive and risk someone making the connection to Kepler? Try to move him off the ship secretly? Every option had dangers. On the 3rd day, Dr. Carter sent an urgent message to the guards. Morrison's vital signs were improving. His body was healing faster than expected. He was starting to show signs of consciousness. He might wake up within hours. The guards immediately reported this to the Queen. Zilara received the message during a strategy meeting with her senior officers. She kept her expression neutral, finished the meeting calmly, dismissed everyone properly. Only when she was alone did she allow herself to show emotion. Morrison was going to wake up. Soon. That changed everything. A dead man could not reveal secrets. An unconscious man could not answer questions. But a conscious Morrison could speak, could confirm or deny things, could expose her lies if he chose to. She had to face him before he woke up fully, had to understand what he remembered, what he knew, what he might say. This was her last chance to control the situation, but another part of her, a part she barely acknowledged, wanted to see him again. Wanted to look into the eyes of the man who haunted her thoughts for 8 years, wanted to understand how he survived. Wanted to know if he was still the same soldier who sang in tunnels and saved civilians at the cost of everything. Zilara made her decision. She would let him wake up. She would speak to him privately, with no guards, no recordings, no witnesses. They would have a conversation, just the 2 of them, warrior to warrior. She would learn his intentions and decide what to do based on what she discovered. It was risky. It was perhaps foolish. But she needed answers more than she needed safety. She sent orders to the medical bay. When Morrison woke up, she was to be notified immediately. No one else was to speak to him. No interrogations. No questions. He was her prisoner personally, and she would handle him herself. Dr. Carter received these orders with growing certainty that something significant was happening. She had never heard of a queen taking personal interest in a single prisoner. Whatever connection existed between Morrison and the alien leader, it was deep and complicated. She began preparing Morrison for consciousness, reducing the sedatives, allowing his brain to start functioning normally again. She monitored his brain activity closely, watching the patterns that indicated he was climbing back toward awareness. 6 hours later, Morrison's eyes opened. They were confused at first, unfocused, trying to understand where he was. Then clarity returned. She watched him assess the situation quickly. Like the trained soldier he was, alien medical bay, restraints, guards captured. His first words were typical of him. He asked about his team, about the battle, about how many escaped. Not about himself, not about his own injuries. He wanted to know if his people were safe. Carter told him quietly that she did not know about the others, but she warned him that something unusual was happening. The Queen herself had taken personal interest in him. He needed to be careful about what he said and did. Morrison absorbed this information calmly. Then he asked a simple question that made Carter's blood run sea. Zylara entered the medical bay alone. She had dismissed all the guards, ordered all recording devices disabled, sealed the room from outside observation. This violation of standard security protocols would raise questions later, but she had no choice. This conversation needed to remain private. Morrison lay in the medical bed, no longer in the stasis pod. His injuries were still severe, his body wrapped in bandages and connected to various machines. But his eyes were clear and alert. He watched her enter with the calm attention of someone who had been in dangerous situations many times before. Dr. Carter stood nearby, but Zylara gestured for her to leave. The human doctor hesitated, looking at Morrison. He gave her a small nod, telling her it was okay to go. Carter left reluctantly, glancing back one final time before the door sealed behind her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other. 8 years had passed since Kepler 442b. Both had changed. Morrison looked older, worn by war and injury. Zylara wore a crown now, carried the weight of an empire on her shoulders. But the essential parts of them remained the same. Two warriors shaped by the same battle. Morrison broke the silence first. His voice was rough from disuse, but steady. He asked if she was disappointed that he was not dead. The question was direct, almost casual, as if they were discussing simple facts rather than life and death. Zylara did not answer immediately. She moved closer to the bed, studying his face carefully. She could use her telepathic abilities to read his thoughts, to understand his intentions, but she chose not to. This conversation required honesty, and mental intrusion would poison that possibility. Finally, she spoke. She said she thought he was dead. For 8 years, she believed the reactor explosion had killed him. She had convinced herself that her victory at Kepler was real, even if the details of his death were altered. She told herself the lie so many times that she almost believed it. Morrison listened without expression. Then he explained what actually happened. The reactor explosion was staged, carefully calculated to look fatal while giving him a chance to survive. He ejected in a minimal life pod seconds before detonation. The radiation and cold should have killed him anyway. He drifted for 3 weeks before a human deep space patrol found him. He spent 4 months in medical treatment, died twice on the operating table, recovered slowly, painfully. By the time he was functional again, the story of his death had spread. The ghost of Kepler had become a legend, a myth that inspired human resistance. His superiors decided to keep the truth secret. Let the legend live while the man disappeared into other assignments. Zylara absorbed this information quietly. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Did he know she had lied about killing him? Did he know she built her reputation on a false story? Morrison met her gaze directly. He said he figured it out about a year after Kepler. Human intelligence monitored Vorthak communications. They noticed when she was promoted, when she rose to power. They noted that her fame came partly from defeating the ghost of Kepler. He understood what that meant. She claimed a victory she did not actually achieve. Zylara felt her heart's beating faster. Her entire reign could crumble if this information became public. She asked why he never exposed her. Why he kept silent for years when he could have destroyed her credibility with a single transmission. Morrison considered the question carefully before answering. He said he understood why she lied. She needed a victory at Kepler after months of defeats. Her superiors demanded results. The truth would have destroyed her career. So she created a story that gave her what she needed. He respected that in a way. Survival sometimes required bending the truth. Besides, he added with a slight smile, he did not particularly want to be famous. The legend of the ghost helped human morale, but he preferred to work quietly. Let people believe he died a hero. That served everyone's purposes except hers. Zalara found herself responding to his practical attitude despite herself. There was no judgment in his voice, no moral superiority, just calm assessment of a complicated situation. She remembered why he had been so difficult to defeat at Kepler. He thought like she did, seeing war as a game of choices rather than simple right and wrong. She asked what he wanted now. Was he planning to expose her secret? Use it to bargain for his freedom? Blackmail her into some kind of deal? Morrison shook his head slowly. He said he wanted something simpler. He wanted to survive. He wanted Dr. Carter to survive. If possible, he wanted to return to his own people. Beyond that, he had no grand plans. He was just a soldier trying to make it through another day. But, he added carefully, he recognized that they were in an unusual position. They both had power over each other. She could kill him easily right now, but if she did, questions would be asked. Her officers had seen her reaction to his name. Any suspicious death would lead to investigations, and investigations might uncover the truth about Kepler. Meanwhile, he could expose her lies if he chose. One transmission to the right people, one conversation with the wrong officer, and her reputation would collapse. The mighty Queen Zalara, built on a foundation of false victories. So, Morrison suggested, perhaps they could help each other. He stays quiet about Kepler. She helps him and Dr. Carter escape. Both of them survive. Both keep their secrets, both move forward. Simple mutual benefit. Zalara considered his proposal. It had a certain logical appeal, but she saw problems immediately. She could not simply let him escape. That would raise enormous questions. Why would the Queen personally free a human prisoner? Officers would investigate. They would find the connection to Kepler eventually. She countered with her own suggestion. She would stage an execution. Public, formal, witnessed by her senior officers. Morrison and Carter would be officially dead, but secretly, she would place them in an escape pod with supplies and coordinates to reach neutral space. They disappear into the galaxy while everyone believes they died. Morrison thought about this plan carefully. It could work. Staged executions were not uncommon. If done properly, no one would question it. He would be free, Carter would be safe, and Zylara's secret would remain buried. Clean solution, but he had one condition. Before agreeing to anything, he needed to know something. He needed her to answer one question honestly. He would know if she lied. His survival depended on trusting her at least a little bit, and trust required truth. Zalara agreed cautiously. What did he want to know? Morrison asked what she remembered most about Kepler 442b. Not the tactics, not the battles, not the strategic details. What moment from those 6 months stayed in her mind? What did she think about when she remembered that campaign? The question surprised her. She expected something about military matters or political concerns. This was personal, psychological. It made her uncomfortable. She did not like revealing personal thoughts, especially to an enemy. But she had agreed to answer honestly. And something about Morrison's direct gaze made her want to tell the truth. Perhaps because he had been honest with her. Perhaps because after 8 years, she finally had someone who understood what that battle meant. She told him about the surveillance footage, about seeing him sing while setting explosive charges, about hearing fragments of that old human song through damaged audio. She described how that moment haunted her more than all the military defeats, because it revealed something fundamental about humans that the Vorthak had lost. The song was Amazing Grace, she said. She looked up the name later, tried to understand what it meant. Grace in the middle of horror. Beauty during war. The ability to remain human even when surrounded by death. Her people had conquered 70% of the galaxy, but they had forgotten how to find grace in difficult moments. That was what she remembered most about Kepler. Not the tactics or the casualties. Just a human soldier singing quietly in a tunnel, finding a moment of peace in the middle of chaos. Morrison listened to her answer in silence. When she finished, he nodded slowly. That was honest, he said. He could tell, and it showed him something important. It showed him that she was not just a conqueror without conscience. She was someone who noticed things, who thought about meaning, who could be troubled by beauty even in an enemy. He told her his own memory. During the siege, he once watched her forces from a distant ridge through binoculars. After one of his ambushes, he saw her personally tend to wounded soldiers. She moved among them, speaking quietly, offering comfort. It was not the behavior of a monster. It was the behavior of a leader who genuinely cared about her people. That moment made him realize something, Morrison said. They were not so different, he and she. Both warriors doing difficult jobs. Both carrying responsibility for people who trusted them. Both trying to survive a war neither of them started. The galaxy painted them as enemies, and they were. But they were also just people trying to do their duty the best they could. Zylara felt something shift in her chest. For 8 years she had thought of Morrison as her nemesis, as the man who humiliated her, as a ghost she needed to forget. But sitting here now, talking honestly, she realized he was just a soldier like herself, shaped by the same battle, changed by the same experiences. She agreed to his terms. She would stage the execution carefully. Zylara left the medical bay quickly, her mind racing. She found Commander Velkath waiting in a secured conference room, his expression serious and troubled. He had spread multiple data displays across the table, showing information from various sources. She recognized the format immediately: intelligence reports, historical records, analysis documents. He began his report without preamble. Over the past 3 days, he had been investigating Lieutenant Kyle Morrison. The investigation started as simple curiosity about the Queen's unusual interest in a common prisoner. But what he found went far deeper than expected. Velkath showed her the human intelligence reports he had discovered. References to the ghost of Kepler. Stories about a phantom warrior who held off an entire Vorthak invasion force. The reports were fragmentary, dismissed by most human analysts as legends and exaggerations. But they all pointed to the same event. Kepler 442b. 8 years ago. He pulled up Morrison's service record and laid it beside the timeline of the Kepler campaign. The gaps in Morrison's assignments matched perfectly. He was assigned to Kepler 442b as a military advisor. He was reported killed during the final battle. His death was never confirmed with physical evidence because the body was supposedly destroyed in a reactor explosion. But if Morrison was alive now, Velkath said carefully, then he must have survived that explosion. Which meant the reports of his death were incorrect. Which meant the stories about the ghost of Kepler were not legends at all. They were real. Zylara listened with a calm expression that hid the panic building inside her. She asked what conclusion he drew from this information. Velkath chose his words carefully. He was loyal, but he was also honest. He said the official Vorthak record stated that Commander Zylara personally killed the human advisor at Kepler in single combat. But if that advisor was Kyle Morrison, and if Morrison was alive, then obviously the official records were inaccurate. He was not accusing the Queen of lying, he added quickly. Perhaps there was confusion during the battle. Perhaps someone else died and was mistaken for Morrison. These things happened in combat. The statement was diplomatic, but both of them understood its real meaning. Velkath knew something was wrong with the official story. He was giving Zylara a chance to explain before he took the matter further. Zylara faced a critical choice. She could maintain the lie, insist the records were correct, and order Velkath to drop the investigation. But he had too much evidence now. Other officers would eventually find the same information. The truth would come out eventually, or she could take a terrible risk and tell Velkath the truth. Trust him to understand. Trust him to remain loyal despite learning that her greatest victory was built on a lie. Before she could decide, another message arrived. This one from Dr. Carter in the medical bay. Morrison's condition had taken an unexpected turn. His body was rejecting some of the Vorthak medical treatments. He needed immediate intervention or he would die within hours. The message was coded carefully, but Zylara understood its real meaning. Carter was lying. Morrison was stable. This was their signal. Something had gone wrong with the plan, and they needed to act now, not later. Zylara made a decision. She told Velkath to gather the senior officers. They would hold an emergency tribunal for the human prisoners. Justice needed to be swift and public. Morrison would be executed at dawn. She wanted all command staff present to witness it. Velkath looked surprised by the sudden decision, but he obeyed. He began sending messages to the other officers, calling them to the main assembly hall. Zylara watched him work, knowing she was gambling everything on a desperate plan. She returned to the medical bay alone. Morrison lay in the bed, looking at her with questions in his eyes. Dr. Carter stood nearby, tense and worried. Zylara explained the situation quickly. Velkath had discovered the connection to Kepler. The investigation was moving faster than expected. They needed to execute the escape plan immediately, but there was a complication. The execution would be public, witnessed by her entire command staff. The original plan assumed a private execution with minimal witnesses. This would be much more difficult to fake. Morrison absorbed this information with his usual calm. He asked what resources they had. What could be done in the time available? Zylara explained the execution chamber design. It was a large room with a central platform, surrounded by observation galleries for witnesses. The platform connected to a disposal system designed to destroy bodies completely, leaving no remains. She could potentially use that system to hide Morrison and Carter instead of killing them. The disposal system led to a waste processing facility, which connected to the ship's lower levels. From there, they could reach the escape pod bays. It was dangerous and complicated, but possible. Carter pointed out a problem. Morrison could barely walk. His injuries were too severe for the kind of movement this escape would require. He needed help. She could support him to some degree, but navigating hostile ship corridors while carrying a wounded man would be nearly impossible. Zylara considered this carefully. Then she made an unexpected offer. She knew a Vorthak medical officer who might help, a young technician named Kethra, who had shown signs of doubt about the Empire's methods. Kethra had questioned orders, shown mercy to prisoners, expressed concerns about the brutality of their campaigns. Zylara had been watching her as a potential security risk, but now that potential risk could become an asset. If Kethra was willing to defect, she could help Morrison and Carter navigate the ship. She knew the layouts, the security protocols, the places where they could hide. Morrison asked if Zylara trusted this Kethra. Trust was a strong word, Zylara replied. But sometimes you had to take risks based on incomplete information. Kethra had shown enough doubt that she might be willing to help, especially if it meant escaping an empire she no longer believed in. They had 6 hours until dawn. 6 hours to set everything up. Zylara would speak to Kethra privately, test her loyalty, make the offer. If Kethra agreed, she would be stationed in the waste processing facility during the execution. When Morrison and Carter came through, Kethra would guide them to the escape pods. Meanwhile, Carter would prepare Morrison for movement, give him stimulants, pain suppressors, anything that would let him function despite his injuries. It would be temporary and dangerous, but they only needed a few hours. Morrison agreed to the plan. He had been in worse situations, he said with a slight smile. Not many, but a few. If they all played their parts correctly, this could work. Zylara left to find Kethra. She located the young medical officer in a supply room, organizing equipment. Kethra straightened immediately when the Queen entered, showing proper respect but also visible nervousness. She knew the Queen rarely spoke to junior officers personally. Zylara asked direct questions. What did Kethra think about the war? About the Empire's methods? About the treatment of prisoners? The questions were dangerous. Expressing doubt could be considered treason, but Zylara's tone suggested she wanted honest answers, not blind loyalty. Kethra hesitated, then spoke carefully. She believed in the Vorthak people, but she questioned whether endless conquest served their interests. She had seen too much suffering, too many atrocities committed in the name of empire. She did not know if victory was worth the cost they were paying in basic morality. Zylara listened without expression. Then she made her offer. Help 2 human prisoners escape. Defect with them. Start a new life away from the Empire. In exchange, Zylara would ensure no pursuit. Kethra would simply disappear, reported as killed in an accident. The offer shocked Kethra into silence. She stared at the Queen with wide eyes, trying to understand if this was a test or a genuine opportunity. Why would the Queen help prisoners escape? Why would she offer this to a junior officer she barely knew? Zylara did not explain her full reasons. She simply said that sometimes circumstances required unusual choices. Kethra could accept the offer or refuse, but she needed to decide quickly. There was no middle ground, no time for careful consideration. Kethra thought for only a few seconds. Then she accepted. She would help the humans escape. She would leave the Empire, Whatever consequences came from that choice, she would face them. Zilara provided quick instructions. Position yourself in the waste processing facility. When the humans come through, guide them to escape Pod Bay 7. The pod there would be prepped and ready. Once they launched, Kethra's part was done. She would go with them to wherever they chose to flee. The plan was set. All the pieces were moving into position, but Zilara felt a growing unease. Plans rarely survived contact with reality. Something would probably go wrong. She just hoped they could adapt quickly enough when it did. Dawn approached. The senior officers gathered in the execution chamber, taking their positions in the observation galleries. Commander Velkath stood near the front, watching everything carefully. Zilara could feel his suspicious gaze on her, analyzing her behavior, looking for explanations. Guards brought Morrison and Carter into the chamber. Morrison walked slowly, supported by Carter. He looked weak and in pain, but his eyes remained alert. He scanned the room quickly, noting exits, guard positions, potential problems. Always the soldier, always assessing. Zilara stood on the main platform, projecting absolute authority. She announced the charges. Silence filled the execution chamber as Velkath finished presenting his evidence. Every officer present understood the implications. If Morrison was the ghost of Kepler, and if he survived, then the Queen's story about defeating him could not be true. The foundation of her reputation, the victory that launched her rise to power, was built on lies. Zilara stood perfectly still on the platform. Her mind raced through options, calculating consequences, trying to find a path through this disaster. She could deny everything, but Velkath had too much evidence. She could claim confusion during battle, but that made her look incompetent. She could arrest Velkath for questioning her authority, but that would only confirm his accusations. Before she could respond, Morrison spoke. His voice was weak but clear, carrying across the chamber despite his injuries. He addressed Velkath directly, confirming the commander's findings. Yes, he was the advisor at Kepler 442b. Yes, he was the one they called the Ghost. Yes, he survived the final battle. The officers stirred with interest. A living legend stood before them. The human warrior who held off an entire Vorthak invasion force. Many of them had heard the stories, dismissed them as exaggerations. Now those stories were real. But then Morrison continued speaking, and what he said changed everything. He confirmed that Commander Zilara did defeat him at Kepler. Her forces broke through his defenses. Her strategy eventually overcame his tactics. She destroyed his positions, scattered his fighters, forced him into a desperate escape attempt. The victory was hers, fairly won through superior numbers and relentless pressure. He survived the escape only through luck and human stubbornness. The reactor explosion was supposed to be his end. Instead, it became his salvation through pure chance. His survival did not diminish her victory. She won the battle. He simply refused to stay dead afterward. The explanation was clever and mostly true. It gave Zilara credit for defeating him without contradicting the fact that he was still alive. The officers nodded slowly, accepting the logic. A warrior could win a battle even if the enemy somehow survived afterward. But Zilara understood what Morrison had just done. He saved her reputation at the cost of his own freedom. By confirming he was the Ghost, he made himself enormously valuable. The Vorthak military would want to study him, interrogate him, understand how humans resisted their power. He would not be simply executed now. He would be kept alive for weeks, maybe months, subjected to endless questioning and analysis. The escape plan was ruined. Security around him would be absolute. Dr. Carter would be separated from him. Kethra would be waiting in vain. Morrison had sacrificed his freedom to protect Zilara's secret. Velkath accepted Morrison's explanation with a formal nod. He had his answers. The mystery was solved. He had not accused the Queen of lying, and Morrison's statement supported the official story. Everyone could move forward with the truth clarified. He suggested that Morrison be transferred to the military intelligence facility instead of executed. The Ghost of Kepler was too valuable to waste. His knowledge of human tactics, his understanding of resistance strategies, his experience surviving impossible situations, all of this could serve the Empire if properly extracted. The other officers agreed immediately. Zilara found herself trapped by her own command structure. She could not order Morrison executed now without raising questions. Her officers expected her to be pleased by this development. The greatest human warrior of the war, captured alive, ready to reveal all his secrets. She looked at Morrison, and their eyes met. He showed no fear, no regret, just calm acceptance. He had made his choice knowing the cost. He saved her throne, and now he would pay the price for that choice. Something crystallized in Xylara's mind in that moment. For 8 years she had built her power through calculation and ruthlessness. She made the hard choices, sacrificed others when necessary, did whatever the Empire required. That approach had made her queen, but it had also made her someone she barely recognized. Morrison reminded her that there were other ways to be strong. He chose sacrifice over self-preservation. He showed grace under impossible pressure. He remained human even in the face of death. These were not weaknesses. They were a different kind of strength that she had forgotten. She made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She ordered an immediate evacuation of the execution chamber, cited a reactor instability warning, a potential emergency. Her voice carried absolute authority that no one dared question. Officers moved quickly toward the exits, following emergency protocols. In the chaos of evacuation, Xylara moved to Morrison's side. She told the guards to escort him to the escape pods, not the intelligence facility. They hesitated, confused by orders that contradicted everything they expected. She repeated the command with ice in her voice. "Obey now or face execution for insubordination." Velkath tried to approach, questions forming on his face. Xylara ordered him to oversee the evacuation, to ensure all personnel reached safety quickly. He obeyed reluctantly, his suspicious gaze lingering on the Queen and her unusual behavior. Xylara personally escorted Morrison and Carter through the corridors. They moved quickly despite Morrison's injuries. Dr. Carter supported him on one side, keeping him mobile. They reached the waste processing facility where Kethra waited, confused but ready. The young Vorthak medical officer joined them without hesitation. She had made her choice to defect, and seeing the Queen herself leading this escape only confirmed she was making the right decision. Together, the four of them navigated through maintenance corridors, avoiding security patrols, moving toward escape pod Bay 7. They reached the bay within minutes. Xylara had prepared the pod earlier, loaded it with supplies, programmed coordinates to neutral space. She opened the hatch and gestured for them to enter. Morrison paused at the entrance, looking back at Xylara. No words passed between them, but none were needed. He nodded once, a gesture of respect between warriors who understood each other. She returned the nod, acknowledging what they shared and what they were letting go. Dr. Carter and Kethra entered the pod. Morrison followed, moving carefully despite his pain. The hatch sealed. Xylara activated the launch sequence from the external controls. The pod ejected smoothly, accelerating away from the flagship, disappearing into the darkness of space. Xylara stood alone in the bay, watching the pod's trajectory on the monitors until it vanished from sensors. Then she triggered the emergency protocols she had prepared. A small explosion in the execution chamber, enough to damage systems but not seriously harm anyone. The reactor instability she cited became real, justifying the evacuation. She returned to the execution chamber and reported to her officers. Morrison attempted escape during the evacuation chaos. His pod malfunctioned and exploded before it could be intercepted. The human prisoners were dead, destroyed by their own desperate attempt to flee. Unfortunate but final. The damage to the chamber and the confusion of the evacuation supported her story. No one had clear visibility during those minutes. The officers accepted her explanation, though Velkath watched her with thoughtful eyes that suggested he suspected more than he said. In the weeks that followed, life returned to normal aboard the flagship. Xylara commanded her forces, conquered territory, enforced imperial will. But something had changed in her. The absolute certainty she once felt about Vorthak's superiority had cracked. She found herself questioning orders, considering consequences, thinking about the cost of endless conquest. Velkath noticed the change. He began finding evidence of Morrison's escape, small details that did not match the official story. But instead of exposing Xylara, he requested a private meeting. They talked for hours about the war, about the Empire, about the price of victory. Velkath revealed that he had identified other officers who shared doubts. Not rebels, but thoughtful warriors who wondered if conquest could continue forever. They saw that human resistance was different from other species. Humans did not break easily. They fought with creativity and determination that technology alone could not overcome. Perhaps, Velkath suggested carefully, the Empire needed to consider alternatives to total conquest. Not surrender, but strategic recalculation. The war had been going for 30 years with no clear end in sight. Maybe victory was not possible. Maybe survival required adaptation rather than domination. Zylara listened to these dangerous ideas without immediate rejection. She thought about Morrison singing in a tunnel, about grace in the middle of horror, about the strength it took to sacrifice yourself for others. These were not human weaknesses. They were human strengths that the Vorthak had forgotten. She did not commit to any changes immediately. But she stopped pushing for aggressive expansion. She ordered her forces to consolidate positions rather than seeking new conquests. She began studying human culture, trying to understand what made them so resilient. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Morrison's pod reached a human outpost. He was debriefed extensively, providing valuable intelligence about Vorthak operations. Kethra's defection proved even more valuable, giving humans insight into enemy thinking and strategy. Dr. Carter was promoted for her actions during captivity. Morrison returned to active duty after medical treatment, assigned to training.